Hello, wonderful people. The main event of today is almost here. It's Rosina. Dear colleagues, please take your seat because the main event is here. As always, it's Rosina with the report of the chairperson of STAP. And after lunch, I would say that she'll bring a smile to our face. So let's get ready. Rosina, over to you.
Okay, greetings, Jeff family. I'm very grateful, as others are, to Brazil to host this meeting in a country so full of amazing creatures, and I'll try to highlight some of them in my presentation. And it's always fun to follow my younger sibling, the IEO, because STAP is a mature 28 years old. So as you know, I always start my presentations with a wonder of nature, and here you have a jaguar, which is Panthera onca, the only living member of the genus native to the Americas, and this one is wading, swimming, or fishing in the wetlands of the Pantanal. And recently, a group of researchers from the Fiamma Ecological Station in Brazil's Mato Grosso state showed that the diet of these jaguars in the protected areas is really fish and caimans, which is very odd and surprising because these big cats are known for eating terrestrial mammals. But the abundance of all that aquatic food there in the protected areas allows the highest density of jaguars, 12 per 100 square kilometers. So hypothetically, had you all been in the Pantanal on your field trip when the CEO suggested you all go swimming, And this Cayman, which is the one you all saw, thank you, Sonja, you might not have been worried. However, we are very happy that you all realized the risk of his appetite was too great. Okay, let me show you STAP, and I hope you have met our two newest members over here. Dr. Ngoni Chirinda, who is the panel member for climate mitigation from Zimbabwe and Morocco, and Dr. Miriam Diamond, who is our panel member for chemicals and waste from our co-chair's country of Canada. They're here for their first in-person meeting, so I hope you can welcome them. And soon you'll have a chance to approve a new panel member for international waters. The current panel member, Blake Ratner, is going to continue on to work for STAP on the risk appetite issue. But very sadly, I have to report that our previous chemicals and waste panel member, Dr. Jamidu Katima from Tanzania, passed away on the 10th of June, and we all send his family our condolences. So here is the presentation order: new science, our reports, our future work program for you to review, and observations on the very important GEF program. So first to new science. For the last 4 years, from 20 to 23, going down the columns, going down the rows, you can see that the World Economic Forum, their risk reports have been dominated by all these environmental risks shown in blue, but to a lesser extent, an important extent, the social risks in red. And so we can see that the fears of environmental damage continuing to be costly to the global economy are everywhere. Climate action failure, which should have just popped up as green, has been either number 1 or number 2 for these last several years in the top 5 risks. And this year, for the first time, if you look in 2023 row, the WEF differentiated between failure to mitigate and failure to adapt to climate change, a very important distinction. As you know, climate mitigation has often attracted the most attention and funding, but we all know that the ability to cope with ongoing changes and more in store is really important. It's really become an immediate concern as extreme events everywhere are around us. And just in the last few weeks, there's been a litany of extreme events. I think last week, Beijing logged its hottest day in June ever. In Texas, there's a deadly heat wave in its 3rd week. Temperatures are at 46 degrees C. And in India, morgues and hospitals were overwhelmed when temperatures hit 45 degrees. The Canadian wildfires that burnt so furiously this month, the smoke was felt across much of the US, including New York, Washington, DC, and my own state of Michigan. And here in Brazil, an extratropical cyclone hit the Rio Grande do Sul region with torrential rains and many lost lives. And in May, the Democratic Republic of the Congo had deadly flooding, as did Rwanda and Uganda. Also in this list, you see that biodiversity loss, which should have just changed to a lighter green, ranked in the top 5 risks for all 4 years. And if you look now in the palest green, I think, you see extreme weather, and that is closely related to natural disasters. And the remaining red ones, infectious disease, erosion of social cohesion, livelihood crises, involuntary migration, those are all intimately, as we know, related to disasters that are increasingly exacerbated by climate change, loss of habitat, and loss of ecosystem integrity. So if you were to conclude that the environment is involved in everything, everywhere, all the time, you'd be absolutely right. Let me turn to some new science slides, 2 recent reports from the World Meteorological Organization. The first one, the State of Global Climate in 2022, unfortunately, shows that all 7 climate change indicators are going in the wrong direction. 4 of them are going up: greenhouse gas concentrations, mean surface temperature, sea level rise, and ocean heat content. And the remaining 3 are going down. That is sorry, the ocean oops, now I've got to go backwards. The ocean pH is the middle of the second row. So ocean acidification is increasing, but the pH is decreasing. We see sea ice extent decreasing, and we see global glacier mass change really decreasing. So the 8 warmest years on record, as you probably know, were between 2015 and 2022. And despite the lingering La Nina event that we had these last 3 years, and all of these impacts are beginning to have effects on populations worldwide. The prolonged drought in Africa, the record-breaking rainfall in Pakistan, the heat waves that I mentioned in both China and Europe, and no part of the world is actually saved. The second WMO report, the gray one, synthesizes climate predictions for 2023 to 2027, and I'm sorry that didn't have much good news either. The most recent CO2 concentration in the atmosphere, measured at the famous Mauna Loa Observatory in Hawaii, hit 424 parts per million in May, and that's the circle you see around the CO2 concentration chart. And right next to that, you see there's a 2/3 chance of breaching the 1.5 degrees Celsius in the next 5 years. That's where you see the purple oval. And that is expected to be possible because of the confluence of greenhouse gas emissions and the El Nino that's starting. And so the temperature increase and the El Nino together are expected to produce patterns that increase rainfall in the Sahel, in Northern Europe, in Alaska, but decrease rainfall over the Amazon and parts of Australia. Ice is not much good news either. Here, NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, latest trend analysis is suggesting that summer Arctic sea ice actually decreased 13% a decade, which is fast and much faster than we had previously estimated. And I'm sure you've also heard there have been increases in ocean temperatures in recent months that could greatly accelerate global warming. And in fact, in March, the sea surface temperature in the oceans passed 21 degrees C for the first time since these records were measured. And so, that rapid warming can melt ground-based ice and accelerate sea level rise. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the IPCC, finally produced its grand synthesis report from all the previous reports I've told you over the last year, and it also provides a stark warning that the pace and scale of action are insufficient to tackle climate change. And as we know, the impacts will be focused among the economically and socially marginalized people. They say the window is narrowing, but we can still stay near the 1.5 degrees C if we ramp up a number of things, ambition, take more urgent and decisive action. And so these green paths that just popped up add up many positive actions to a climate resilient development pathway with mitigation, adaptation, and equity measures to help us get to sustainable development. And we all know that aggressive action has all these co-benefits that we've been talking about the last few days, including human health and food, energy, and water security, economic gains, and it will reduce losses and damages to nature and people. And I'll say more about co-benefits later, but the slow action puts us on these yellow or red paths, which take us into the danger zone. And what the IPCC recommends, which I think is particularly interesting, is that we put in place enabling conditions which actually correspond very well with STAP's previous recommendations and the actions that the GEF is taking, such as coherence between climate and development actions, behavioral change, integration across sectors and timescales, finance and innovation, sharing of diverse knowledge and values, political commitment to inclusive governance, and ecosystem stewardship. So the GEF family is furthering the needed green pathway to sustainability. Let me turn to plastics and chemicals. There's two new reports about pollution from plastic and associated chemicals and how to improve governance, very important. Of these global pollutants, about 13,000 chemicals are associated with plastics and plastic production. We know 3,000 of those are of potential concern, but amazingly for 6,000 of them, we have no information. They have not been assessed. Examples of these kinds of chemicals of concern include flame retardants, or PFAS, now called forever chemicals, and those are the poly and perfluorinated alkyl substances. They repel water, they repel stains, they repel grease, but we're even finding them in endangered species now. Also phthalates, which are used to confer flexibility in plastics, among many others. But I think you get the picture that these chemicals of concern are used in toys and packaging and electronic equipment and textiles and furniture and vehicles and medical devices. And they're getting into our bodies as well as food and environment. Only 128 or 1% of these are actually covered by the multilateral environmental agreements by BRS and Minamata. So there are significant gaps in both governance and financial mechanisms to control plastics and plastic-associated chemicals. Now, of course, the proposed plastics treaty will address these issues, and not a moment too soon. I mean, we all have spoken about how we need to reduce the use of harmful chemicals and transform the plastic sector, and need circular economy approaches in the production and use of chemicals. You did ask me for some positive news, so maybe there is from Canada. Using the expansive Canadian forest inventory seems to confirm more specialized experiments in smaller settings that higher tree diversity can lead to greater accumulation of carbon and nitrogen in the soil. So temperate and boreal forest soils hold more carbon than actually the living plants above them. So increasing soil stocks is really important. So this is really an interesting example of how climate positive and nature positive can work together. The forest diversity can enhance carbon that's held in soils and make them more fertile. So a win-win. And maybe another good news story. New analyses show that these vast underwater kelp forests that go from the poles to the subtropical coastlines can have enormous value to people. And the colors are showing you 5 different main kinds of these kelps and where they grow. But the dollar is spread around the regions, and it totals about $500 billion a year because these kelp forests contribute to fisheries production, to pollution removal, and to sequestration of at least 5 million tons of carbon from the atmosphere. And so this is highlighting their blue carbon potential for carbon mitigation and the co-benefit of advancing livelihoods, food, habitat for lots of critters, and coastal protection. Okay, so let's go on to our reports and recent work. So over the last 6 months since we talked to you, we've been busy with outreach and communication of STAP's work for the broader GEF family and to glean your insights. So the purpose of the metrics webinar, the top one, was to consider how to monitor transformation in the integrated programs and to facilitate rapid learning and adaptive management. And we really aimed this at agency teams responsible for designing the IPs. In addition to a presentation on our advice by Mark Stafford Smith, who's over there, my senior advisor, we had presentations from the World Bank, from UNEP, and from GIZ, the German Agency for International Cooperation, giving their experience with monitoring transformation. We are really happy that many agencies developing the IPs attended, and approaches to including metrics of transformation have already started to appear in the PFDs that you all approved on Monday. A recording of that webinar is available at STAP's website. And then last August, with the GEF Secretariat, we held a training for the new simplified PIF template. And a second session was held in April with the GEF agency technical staff and with the GEF secretarial staff responsible for designing and implementing the projects. And we were very pleased that more than 200 people attended. So STAP talked about what was needed for convincing project rationale, which embodied STAP's 8 enabling elements. And that training material is also on GEF's website. I'm sure you'll find it a captivating video, all in 1 hour. And then the purpose of the third one, the KM&L, Knowledge Management and Learning Workshop, was really to learn from the GEF's agency experiences with KM platforms with the previous IAPs, the Integrated Approach Pilots, and the impact programs to see how this could benefit the integrated programs. We wanted to encourage cooperation and collaboration as the new IPs develop their platforms, and we wanted to consider the broader implications for the GEF KM strategy. And I'll come on to the outcome of this workshop in a few minutes. But there's actually more. Staff participated in 9 IP workshops held around the world with the GEF SEC and agencies. And I have to say, I think our early and often interactions were very fruitful. I think it was a way that we are trying to respond to the Council's request for staff's work to be disseminated and to be used as well as useful. Let's turn to policy coherence. Last year, we issued a policy brief framing policy coherence for the GEF around just 2 simple objectives to ensure that the GEBs, the global environmental benefits, weren't undermined or negated because of misaligned policies or misaligned investment decisions, public or private. And so like these TOPI, we want these policies to be lined up top to bottom and all facing in the same direction if possible. So to follow that, this year we issued, if you will, a full-strength document, but I hope you appreciate accompanied by a shorter updated policy brief for those who want just the highlights. And our advisory document actually gives 8 examples of activities that the GEF could pursue across 3 operational levels, the projects, the programs, and the whole portfolio to improve policy coherence. So for example, we look at how one might consider reducing perverse subsidies and incentives. Next, we've also made some recommendations. So the GEF developed an explicit strategy for coordinating its approach to policy coherence, drawing on we say the GEF should develop an explicit strategy, drawing on our paper and drawing on their enhancing policy coherence through GEF's operation, our brief and our advisory document, and we're very happy to work with GEF SEC on this. But we did make some particular recommendations such that we think the GEF should support countries in developing policy coherence through the country engagement strategies, through their continuing national dialogues to build knowledge, capacity, and learning. And the GEF could also encourage groups of countries that face similar policy challenges in coherence issues to work together, maybe in an integrated program or in a focal area. We've also suggested that this new competitive window on policy coherence might want to adopt some criteria for reviewing proposals, for example, a theory of change and appraising the vertical, horizontal, and temporal policy coherence. And even this window could be used to test different approaches to improving policy coherence by engaging in the policy process. I think policy coherence is a bit like this elusive, silky anteater on the picture. It's really hard to find, but I think you'll know it when you see it. Moving on to knowledge management and learning, One of the new recommendations in GEF's new strategy is that the GEF Secretariat, with support and guidance from staff, should develop a common set of principles to ensure the platforms provide project developers with what they need to know about what works, how, and in what circumstances, and very importantly, too, what might not work. So we wholeheartedly agree with that, and in anticipation of it, we held the workshop I mentioned with the GEF Sec to look at what could be learned from those agency experiences with the previous attempts at integration. And our conclusion is very simple, that 4 principles encapsulated in the first 4 words on this slide are important. We need to be accessible. Platforms have to be open and to all and easy to access. They've got to be searchable. Standardized data and common definitions are important. It's got to be interoperable, the ability to exchange and make use of information across the platforms, and they've got to be durable so that the programs and the knowledge and learning endures and it doesn't die. So in short, like this river otter, the KM systems must be really flexible and dynamic and malleable. But we also think that the KM and L platforms are an integral part of the GEF effectiveness and should be treated no differently than any other project or program. And so we think the same requirements, including evaluation, for example, will be necessary. How is KM&L contributing to actual programmatic solutions? It would be, of course, very helpful if we can avoid a proliferation of related but unconnected platforms. And so can the IPs use pre-existing platforms or join forces? For example, the Blue and Green Island IP is looking at how to build on and link with other KM platforms, including food and plastic. So I think that's really good and should be encouraged. And finally, a question. A KM&L system covering the new IPs is already going to encompass 1/3 of the GEF 8 portfolio. And so could this system we're developing for the IPs serve as a basis for the new overall GEF KM&L strategy? And we're very willing and happy to work with GEF SEC on this and to further develop these common principles. The next paper is innovation. In our 2018 advice to the GEF, we said GEF would benefit from a more systematic approach to innovation, and I think we have heard wild endorsement for that in the many meetings since 2018. I think we're kind of thinking that the GEF has to be like this innovative red shrimp here, diffusing the fangs of a viper fish. In our case, the viper fish is probably climate change or biodiversity loss. But we have to be innovative and we have to think of creative ways to deal with these monstrous problems. So we actually, in the newer report, make 4 recommendations, which are on this slide. We do encourage that the Risk Appetite Subcommittee of the Council members, GEFSEC and staff, begin as soon as we can if we're going to have a risk appetite statement by December Council, and maybe that a subcommittee could meet in the margins of the Assembly. We also recommend using the new dedicated window for innovation to target particular problems and consider marshaling the MSPs to tackle complex problems, maybe from different perspectives. We encourage embedding innovation priorities in the project design upfront and considering maybe developing portfolios of projects to test different kinds of innovative solutions to knotty problems. And of course, build a knowledge management system that really drives learning for innovation and for transformation. Co-benefits. At the last council meeting, staff's co-benefits paper distinguished between benefits that we think are absolutely essential to achieve the global environmental benefits and incidental ones, which maybe aren't required, but which really add to the overall impact of the GEF investment, but we don't currently capture. And I think we heard a lot of discussion about interesting metrics and co-benefits in previous conversations in the last few days. But as you know, if livelihoods are also improved, through local environmental benefits like clean air and clean water, or through socioeconomic benefits like better food or water security, stakeholders are more likely to support a project even after the end of the GEF investment. So the December Council will consider a GEF options paper on improving the capture of socioeconomic well-being co-benefits, as well as adaptation co-benefits. And so we did a little bit further work to try to help in the preparation for that. So our new brief, short, identifies potential local, potential social, and potential economic co-benefits from GEF investments. And we base this on a review, including recent scientific work from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPBES assessments, IEO reports, and of course, the GEF programming document itself. And so in this brief, we discuss how co-benefits could be incorporated into the design of the GEF projects using our enabling elements, again, for good project design. And we suggest some ways you could think about how co-benefits could be tracked and measured. And for example, in a couple of cases, some of the SDG indicators might even make sense. So I'm showing you a grizzly bear who is not only getting food, but all the remnant bodies of these silver salmon actually fertilize the surrounding forest. So here we see a co-benefit not to just one species in terms of lunch, but to actually improving the productivity of the system around this grizzly bear. Next is simple narrative futures. And at the last council meeting, I gave you a brief note on the idea of why we need to think about alternate futures so that we understand how the drivers of change might play out in the future and ensure that our GEF projects are actually designed to be resilient to multiple plausible futures. And that's actually even, of course, pointed out in the GEF 8 strategic programming framework. If you don't consider plausible futures, project outcomes could be short-lived, less resilient, or you could even do something damaging to environment and people. So now this new primer, again with an accompanying short brief, offers practical help to develop simple narratives, and it is closely aligned with the new GEF PIF template. So I think this is all folding together very nicely. And so if you develop narratives early in the design, it helps with identifying and engaging the appropriate stakeholders, getting their buy-in and interests, and widening the range of perspectives about the future. For example, in the Indo-Malay forest biome IP, they've actually outlined 3 plausible futures, which is very exciting. And so I do want to say also, outside the GEF family, considering plausible futures during project design is becoming the leading practice in sustainability and development projects, including among our GEF agencies, but also external organizations. So WWF, CI, FAO, and USAID, for example. So like this local Jamboree, narrative futures, I think, give GEF projects a wider reach to help overcome future obstacles. An example in the literature of the importance of narratives comes from the area of land restoration. And this is a new paper on land restoration which highlights in dark green the areas we intend to restore, but in orange, the areas where temperatures from climate change will exceed 35 degrees Celsius, and in the darkest orange, that might be more than 200 days a year, which will certainly affect health of humans and the ecosystems we intend to restore. Clearly, past conditions will not apply. And then in the blue, the darkest blue, you see where populations will increase, and the yellow dots show countries of high consumption. So the paper concludes restoration of ecosystems will not succeed unless you undertake it in a way that recognizes those additional drivers of consumption and climate change and how those, including environmental security issues, may affect the achievement of durable outcomes. So thinking through drivers and narratives up front and how they may unfold is key to successful delivery of global environmental benefits. You may remember that we delivered our report to the Assembly last November, quite early, and we set out transformation entry points to help GEF achieve its goal of systems transformation to ensure healthy, productive, and resilient environment underpinning the well-being of human societies. And we suggested what the GEF could do at its 3 operational levels, as well as deploying its leverage through external alliances. So since then, we looked back. STAP has actually provided guidance on 5 of the recommendations in our Assembly report to help you with the how, and those are the ones that are in the lighter blue. Develop a clear risk framework, develop a more systematic approach to innovation, identify which co-benefits GEF investments could track and why, and how to establish systems for them. And of course, probably our 15th paper on establish a new knowledge management and learning system, which of course is everyone's business in the GEF, with culture change driven from the top down. So we're trying not to just say what the technical literature says, but actually help explain how that information can be made, if you will, GEFable. Okay, GEF Assembly. STAP was delighted to accept Tom Bowie's invitation on behalf of the Canadian government to organize a STAP Science Day on the opening of the GEF Assembly. So we're going to have a youth leaders exchange in the morning of the 22nd, where they will share experience and participate in a panel discussion with an invited audience of youth. And then the afternoon, we'll move to a discussion with a larger group of folks on how Indigenous and local knowledge could help the GEF deliver global environmental benefits. And we will feature a number of case study presentations from the Arctic and the Amazon, and of course, including the GEF's Amazon Sustainable Landscape Program. So this day, but along with the amazing roundtables and side events being developed for the Assembly in August, helps us deliver on the STAP's Assembly Report 6th recommendation, which in the previous slide was to include the voices of youth and other marginalized groups such as Indigenous peoples in the design and implementation of projects by broadening the coverage of the GEF's policies. Let me go quickly through some of our early ideas on a future work program, which Council has asked us to talk about. So here we put some things in loosely short, medium, and long term. So in addition, of course, to the assignment from the IEO on a compendium of agreed definitions, guidelines, and implementation tools and approaches, and relooking at STAP's previous work built on the science community on natural capital, nature-based solutions, source to sea, etc. We're proposing to do a few things. One is we might want to pull together a paper on agrivoltaics. This is the combination of agriculture and photovoltaics, in which you get food and renewable energy systems to be co-located to meet food and energy needs. And we're seeing a project on this in the Net Zero Nature Positive IP. So it might be timely to review the literature and what factors to bear in mind when this is adopted as a solution. Environmental security, we delivered a paper on that for Da Nang in the last Assembly, but the gap analysis of GEF activities in fragile and conflicted states indicates that many GEF agencies have already adopted guidance on operating in those states, and some have emphasized preventing approaches to the underlying causes of fragility and conflict. I have to say that STAP actually sees conflict and fragility as drivers of environmental degradation. And so we wanted to help consider how you could build these up front into project design and into your narratives. Citizen science, I think, was mentioned by Rwanda. That's something where you sort of crowdsource and involve public, youth, indigenous peoples, local communities to contribute to collecting data and observations, and it's a collaborative effort. This could offer the GEF a way to engage and empower such groups. It would help raise GEF awareness, it would help improve data collection, it would certainly encourage learning about the wonders of nature and the broader environment. And I think the CSO also mentioned this. It would perhaps fit quite well with the GEF's new outreach strategy. So we would like to look at how citizen science could be incorporated into projects and programs. Alternative livelihoods came up this morning, and as mentioned, this was actually the Rwanda comment, wasn't it? Many GEF projects refer to goals of achieving alternative livelihoods rather than the current ones, which might be damaging. Well, that truly is a behavioral and cultural issue, which is very hard to change. And the technical literature suggests that these goals may not be achievable in some circumstances. So we would really like to help with this and review the evidence to see if there are useful lessons on practices that could be adopted more widely. So again, reviewing the science and technical literature out there. We certainly look forward to working with the council members on risk appetite, and in the subcommittee for GEF as agreed by council last June. And I think I've done these out of order, haven't I? And on adaptation, STAP will continue to work with the GEF SAC on strengthening adaptation rationales at both the project and the portfolio level, and in coordination with other funds, such as the Green Climate Fund. Over the medium term, we'd like to follow up our work on co-benefits and metrics for transformation, and help think about the metrics you've all been talking about, how to measure across the GEF portfolio. And blended finance is an issue, of course, very, very important to the GEF, and essential if we're going to be scaling and transforming. But there are diverse models of blended finance, and some are really complex, and some have really long logic chains to deliver the global environmental benefits. So we want to take a look again at the literature and theory and analysis of blended finance with an eye towards helping that parties have confidence that these diverse approaches will result in GEBs. Indigenous learning and knowledge, you know, in our opening ceremony, I was again struck by that amazing statistic that 80% of the remaining biodiversity on our planet is on indigenous peoples' lands. And so over the next few months and following all that we will learn at the Assembly, staff would like to consider how GEF projects could deliver on their strong commitment to the inclusive engagement and meaningful participation of indigenous peoples. Longer term, these are not ready for prime time, but there's a lot of questions coming in about carbon markets. It's a huge area, but there's increasing interest in the global south in carbon markets as using these as a way to meet their climate goals. So maybe we could at least help collate and review initiatives to try to draw some lessons. And one that just popped up in our retreat on Sunday, the healthcare sector is a significant and growing user of resources, but it's also a generator of a lot of types of waste that end up being relevant to the GEF. So maybe we could hold some convenings to review best practices on how to reduce impacts and promote sound solutions to reduce those impacts throughout the product cycle. So those are some early thoughts. Let me quickly go through our observations on the GEF program. So the integrated programs are kind of like this strange, wonderfully unique creature, which is a very versatile spiny katydid. It has many moving pieces, but it all works. And I'm hoping that that is how our IPs are going to be. The IP program documents were exceedingly well prepared. I mean, they really incorporated advice on good project design. We were involved in helping only with the science and technical parts, of course, in selecting lead agencies, reviewing expressions of interest. We went to the IP design workshops. And here's some observations. the PFDs, most of them, considered the problems with a real systems thinking perspective. Improvement is still needed in how the drivers might unfold. But a good example of this was actually the Indo-Malay critical forest biome IP, which I mentioned earlier. Already is thinking about 3 plausible futures and how they might unfold. So that one is what we found exemplary, some of the others less so. All of them had a solid theory of change, had good engagement with stakeholders. Many of the child projects are already focusing on policy coherence, including identifying gaps. And so 4 of them are planning policy coherence. The Amazon Sustainable Landscapes, the Net Zero Nature Positive, the Chemical Supply Chain, and the Mesoamerica Critical Forest Biome. So that's pretty exciting, policy coherence. All of them have an IP and learning component, and I already mentioned that we were really excited that the Blue and Green Islands said, hey, maybe we can link up with existing KM platforms in food and in plastics. Some of these IP PFDs had novel solutions, which is really exciting because that's what you need for scaling and transformation. So the Net Zero Nature Positive IP talks about a whole of economy approach. The Amazon Sustainable Landscapes has a participatory governance mechanisms that's involving IPLCs, indigenous people, local communities, and the private sector. And the chemical supply chain included an interesting novel financing mechanism to transform the textile sector, and then a child project that was looking to manufacture textiles from banana plantation waste. And the Mesoamerica proposed innovative methodologies like what they're calling an e-bio atlas, which is can be helpful for biodiversity monitoring. But on transformational change, we do think all of the IPs need to think a little more about how the transformation can be achieved and adopting metrics for measuring whether those transformational objectives are being achieved. Turning to the rest of the work program, the new PIF template seemed to help produce better quality proposals with many elements of good project design, and tended to shorten, as we all greatly hoped, the length of the proposals. So they did improve on how the projects address STAP's enabling elements and systems thinking in general. However, some projects appeared to have been developed with the old PIF in mind and forced it into the new template. So we're happy to do a 3rd training on PIF if that would be useful. I mean, I think some of the PIFs sort of looked a little bit like the shoebill stork, a bit unbalanced in appearance. And then overall, the work program, there was still improvement needed in 2 areas. One, capturing lessons from previous and related projects to inform future project design. And 2, more consideration of how change could unfold in the future and identifying robust interventions to those. It's also important, and this was often confused in the PIFs, to distinguish between risks from the drivers of change that need to be incorporated into project design, so for example, climate change, and risks to the project implementation. For example, what if the technology turns out to be unsuitable? So the way risks of and to were described, not completely perfectly yet, but we do give you examples of 2 exemplary ones. Plastic reduction in the oceans had a great TOC, theory of change. It incorporated stakeholders from the outset, builds on lessons learned from the past, and it explains how this project fits in a larger landscape. And then UNEP's upscaling of integrated e-mobility had a really detailed explanation of the baseline and the problem, and a well thought out theory of change with causal pathways. And it adopted a circular economy approach to both climate mitigation and to chemicals and waste. So that was very interesting too. So just 2 of the many. I like to highlight them occasionally. Okay, so I know many of you had the rare experience of sighting the pink Amazon river dolphin in your field trip. And despite how beautiful they are, when I say see you in Vancouver, I only mean the council group, and I hope climate change won't shift the range of the pink river dolphin so much by August. So hope to see the GEF family in Vancouver, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Rosina. I think on behalf of everyone, it is always a joy to have you and staff at our council on a regular basis, usually on Wednesday mornings, but today afternoon, and it's still great as usual. And we will have you for a whole day in Vancouver. Anyways, open for comments, congratulations, thank yous, and so on and so forth. The secretary has given us roughly 15, 20 minutes because we're going to work until probably 8 today. So thank you. It's open. Go ahead, Colin.
Thank you, and let me thank also Rosina and your team. I think the science that you have given is you've given it in such a way with lovely pictures, which says a big statement. I think it's also it's also worrying. I think the speed and pace that loss of biodiversity, the impact of climate change, sea level rise is moving at a pace where even the action that we are taking is still not sufficient. So I think the targeted, I think I hear you, especially having a targeted funding, or especially to those that are on the front line of this is very, very important. You know, I joined the, I was following the climate change negotiations as not only as in my country, but later on becoming chief negotiator, also working within AOSIS, at least developed country. During that period, ocean acidification was 280 parts per million. Now today what you're saying is, you know, with the recent science, it's already telling us it's 480 parts per million in terms of carbon dioxide concentration. So basically we have 5 years to reach this 1.5. So this is the urgency of it, because for us it's basically 80% of our population live in the rural areas. They rely on, their livelihood depends on the ocean, on the reefs and all that. But if acidification reaches 550 parts per million, coral begins to dissolve. All this biodiversity we are trying to protect gets lost. So this is why I think that urgency and that's the science for us basically is trying to prepare our population now for the uncertain future, especially coming from a constituency which is largely small island, belongs to the small island developing states, SIDS. It is, I just want to say thank you to your team. You're doing a fantastic job. It's just that I think we just need to do better. I mean, the international community in terms of protecting the planet. I think we're crossing too many planetary boundaries. The frightening and the most serious thing is that when we reach that point of no return, when things become irreversible. For my country already, we are already, 80% of our land is customary owned, traditionally owned by the people. It's only 20% that is registered, documented. It's just that we are relocating populations now, but I think restoring the ecosystem ensuring that food security is there, water security is guaranteed. I think that will prevent this movement from low-lying to high-rise islands. The fear we are having now is that if there is a drought, the fear of conflict. I come from also, it's a very small country, but because of the ethnicity and the richness of the diversity of our culture and people, we also have ethnic conflicts. And our fear is we do not want to see conflict because of water. We do not want to see conflict because of lack of food. It is important that we continue to invest in nature with nature-based solution. I think that's the only place. But I just want to say, I think it's another way of just saying thank you for just giving us an honest presentation on the health of our planet. Thank you too much.
Thank you, Colin. Sam?
Thank you, Co-Chair. So the UK welcomes STAP's involvement in the early stages of the design and mobilisation of the integrated programmes, as well as the STAP and GEFSEC workshop to learn lessons on the knowledge management and learning platforms developed from previous impact programmes and integrated programmes. We also welcome the brief on policy coherence and your ongoing collaboration with the GEF Secretariat on this. We note the importance of this in the context of delivering the Global Biodiversity Framework targets 18 and 19 collectively and coherently. We welcome that a STAP panel member, Blake Ratner, has now taken on responsibility for the risk appetite within the panel. We see a risk framework as a way of enabling innovation within the GEF and urge STAP to work with the GEF Secretariat on this ahead of the next council. Thank you.
Thank you, Sam. Laura?
Yes, thank you. I would also like to thank you for a very inspiring presentation and STAP for its reports, which are of very high quality. So thank you very much. We also appreciate the STAP's continued research and reminders on how the GEF can bring about transformational change. We all know business as usual is not enough, yet truly transformational innovations are very rare. We agree that a clearly articulated level of acceptable risk is key in encouraging such innovations. And supporting countries in ensuring policy coherence is, in a way, another side of the same coin. If we encourage transformations, we cannot punish those who disrupt existing markets or usual way of doing things. Harmful subsidies is one example of a lack of policy coherence, one that we must get rid of. And finally, easy accessibility to best practices is key. And I am glad that the STAP is focusing on knowledge management and learning. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Sano, CSO Network.
Respected Chair, Co-Chair, Secretariat, and Honorable Council members. Good afternoon and many happy returns of the Eid. CSO Network acknowledges the significance of Science and Technical Advisory Panel, STEP. STEP is a positive step towards addressing climate issues and finding the solutions. Report is admirable and all aspects. We express our appreciation. We would like to provide short comments on this. Insufficient focus on stakeholders' engagement. Report lacks specific strategies for involving stakeholders in the process of involving. It's crucial to actively engage collaboration with stakeholders, including local communities, civil society organizations, particularly affected communities affected by calamities. South Asian countries are highly affected by the climate change, and it is important to listen their concerns. Because deforestation, groundwater contamination, air pollution, and sea contamination ratio is increasing dangerously in the region. In the series of consultation and webinars should be expanded into the regional levels, ensure involvement of all stakeholders such as CSOs, youth, persons with disabilities, transgenders, and internally displaced persons' concerns. The GEF CSO Network is thankful to the GEF and Government of Brazil for organizing such a valuable event and providing excellent hospitality. Thank you very much for your time and regards. Mohammad Amin Kirio, Regional Focal Point, South Asia. Thank you.
Thank you, CSO Network. Rob?
Thank you so much. Thank you. Always such an interesting presentation. Thank you so much, Rosina. We really greatly appreciate the hard work of the staff and its secretariat. An effective and independent staff is of the utmost importance to the GEF's operations and ability to deliver global environmental benefits. The staff's work is essential for analyzing GEF policies, guiding GEF strategy, scanning their horizon for future directions the GEF should go. We really appreciate the updates that the staff provided. I was also really interested in the review of future work that you provided, and I should know this, but I don't. I think there's really interesting ideas there, and I want to echo Sam's comments, the UK's comments about the work on the risk appetite. I think that's super important, and we need to do that sooner rather than later. But I'm interested in how you come up with those ideas. It sounds like you do a lot of workshopping, how you decide, and if those are things that you've already decided you're going to do. I recognize the long-term ones had question marks, so I think those are still, but are the other ones you've already decided on? And then how, I guess, if there's ideas, is it that we bring ideas here for what the staff should do, or is there other avenues? I'm just curious about how you really decide what you're going to focus on as the staff. And I'm going to stop there. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Rob. UN Permanent Forum of Indigenous Issues.
Muchas gracias nuevamente por ofrecerme la palabra. He estado escuchando la presentación sobre el tema de conocimiento. Solo para recordar que este año la sesión del Foro Permanente en abril trató sobre la salud planetaria y territorial, que es una perspectiva propia de los pueblos indígenas para entender la situación actual. Y puedo compartir con ustedes dos conclusiones. Primero, que el clima es el lenguaje que la Madre Tierra utiliza para transmitir la vida en el planeta. Enseña cómo cuando se cultiva, cuando se cosecha, cuando se abriga, cuando no. Es un lenguaje en realidad. Esto es una perspectiva distinta. Y en consecuencia, los conocimientos de los pueblos indígenas no necesitan ser validados ni investigados por otras formas de entender, por ejemplo, la ciencia occidental, sino que ya en sí mismo han demostrado su efectividad en la relación armónica con la naturaleza y el cuidado de la diversidad. Esta perspectiva la traigo aquí para que en este grupo, en el STAP sobre conocimiento, ya que se reconoció en el programa de trabajo en la COP15, la importancia de compartir los conocimientos, sea un punto de vista que se tenga en cuenta en el mayor interés para todos. Los pueblos indígenas seguramente están dispuestos a contribuir con soluciones efectivas y con aportes a la gobernanza global frente a la crisis que tenemos actualmente el clima. Y muchas gracias por la presentación tan completa.
Thank you for your contributions. Sylvia?
Thank you, Tom, and thank you also, Rosina and the staff, for the wonderful presentation. As always, we highly appreciate the staff's work. Despite the worrying scientific facts that you remind us of, this always feels a bit like a warm wave of hope. And I think we all need that, especially given the tough negotiations we are in. Also very happy to see Jack again, the alligator. Germany welcomes the STAP report and really appreciates STAP recommendations, in particular regarding the topics of innovation and transformational change. We acknowledge that incentives for innovation are intended to impact GEF programming over the long term, from targeted funding windows to early integration of innovative criteria in programming to knowledge management. We recognize the need to embellish this with quantitative data and therefore highly welcome the proposal to use metrics at an early stage. We further endorse the STAP's efforts for identifying and including co-benefits in project design. We are very curious to see the options paper in the December Council meeting to find out how the STEP's recommendations translate into a stronger results measurement framework regarding the delivery of global environmental benefits. As mentioned during the replenishment, we are also particularly eager to see more on the inclusion of adaptation co-benefits, of course in line with the GEF mandate. Thank you.
Thank you, Sylvia, and thank you, colleagues. I think on behalf of the whole council, you can see that there's a lot of love and affection for you and your colleagues. So over to you, Rosina.
Okay, I know the time is short, so let me try to compress a few things. The urgency that you expressed so well from the Solomon Islands. So we know GEF can't move the entire needle on the planet, but we do have important leverage. Wasn't it Archimedes who said, give me a lever and I'll move the world? So I think we have a number of things that we're trying that could really take off. One is to move transformational change, we really do need to have a way to measure whether we're doing that. I think experimenting with things like this innovation window is very valuable. I think trying to look at all projects and programs that can include a nature positive, climate positive thing is becoming really important. And I think probably, you know, the clearest message of all is that the world economic groups are terrified about this crisis. And so that we hope will unlock more blended finance in significant ways. But I think that has to be obviously done carefully. We're going to be thinking about it with the addition of GBF, but it has to be done in ways that we can, again, document impacts and show that we're getting what we want out of that. So I think the suite of things we're trying with transformation, innovation, nature positive, climate positive are all really good. And I think, as several people said in this meeting already, you know, if you want to have a big change, you might have to take some risk. And so that's why I think getting an understanding of our risk appetite statement, our tolerance as the GEF family sooner rather than later is very important. And so that's why it is on the short term for STAP and maybe the thing we'd most like to even, you know, get moving at the Assembly. Some of the comments referred to, you know, local to regional to global, and I guess I would just say, in the papers that we put together on policy coherence, on knowledge management, co-benefits, et cetera, future narratives, we are trying to think within the envelope of going from local to regional to portfolio, or from project to program to the portfolio level. So I completely agree that we've, you know, while things have to be done sometimes in particular places, the knowledge that we have collected over the years should, you know, as we appropriately access it, should be seamless and going and serving not just projects, but programs and portfolios. On future work, we, you know, I say, Rob, that the job of the STAP is to bring new science and technology into the GEF and to take GEF's needs back out to the community. And so it is kind of a give and take. And so some of our horizon scanning, as you may remember from Da Nang, we decided you're going to have to deal with circular economy sooner or later, and here we are. You're going to have to deal with technically critical elements, and here we are. So some of these short and medium term things are things that we think that the GEF is going to need to figure out how to do. And so these are things that we talk to Jeff Sek about. We hope we can talk more to the agencies and to council about. And we do try to use the mix of the scientific expertise on the STAP and their huge integrated networks, you know, across the IPCC and the IPBES and you name it, the acronym soup of scientists out there, to think about what is most appropriate for GEF. So that's why I wanted to show you this early. Nothing's locked in stone except, I hope, risk. But these are things that we think, A, we could deliver on, B, will become more important to the GEF, and C, we can figure out the communities to work with us. And I think that was a combination of the comments from everyone, and I thank you so much for being willing to listen to an hour of science after lunch.
So thank you very much, Rosina. There is no decision to be adopted under this item. However, I would request again a round of applause for Rosina and her staff. So as per the agenda, we now go into that special decision-making GBFF historic journey. And we have until 6 o'clock. And then after that, as per the schedule, Laura from Colombia and myself, we will convene in executive session in order to discuss a few things. Thank you.
William then will share with
Laura
us.
from Mexico, sorry.
Oh. Laura, please.
No.
Okay.
Wrong.
So William will share with us some housekeeping issues with regards to tomorrow.
Well, thank you very much. As you realize, time is passing and we haven't got all the items on the agenda. So tomorrow morning, well, first of all, after you've had your further discussions on GBFF, we come back as the official council, but in executive session, which means only council members and their advisors, because that's the time when you discuss the selection and review committee report.
Yep.
Okay? So that's what's happening this afternoon, and hopefully you'll be able to get through that relatively quickly. Tomorrow morning, we will start again at 8, and I think the first thing we will put on the table are perhaps the 2 pending decisions on the budget, which I sent out to everybody. If anybody has not received it, please let me know. But I sent one email with the budget of the amended decision on the budget of the GEF Trust Fund, which incorporated the many comments that had been received around the table. And I also sent out an email to everybody with the amended draft decision on the IO budget. So those 2 we look at first. Hopefully we've reflected correctly what you all want. If anybody finds something that shouldn't be there or that's wrong, let us know in advance so that we can fix it before we get to that meeting, okay? So that's one thing. Then we're going to be BNJ. And so we'll have a presentation and a round of discussion on that. And then hopefully briefly the other business. We all know what's on the other business. The request from India to speak, the respect for the UK on a couple of topics that they want, then the assembly and dates for the next meeting. And then we go into the LDCF with SECF Council. We're taking one of the items out that we can put in December, but the others have to be discussed this time, like the work program and the budget and the IO work program and the budget for them. So those have to be decided now. So those we will look at tomorrow. And then after that, we have the summary of the co-chairs, both of the GEF Council and of the LDCF, SECF. And with luck, we will also have a decision on the GBFF, which will come to the table when it's ready. So I can't say if it's going to be in the morning or afternoon, but when it's ready, you will let us know. We will put it on paper, we will share it with everybody, and then you'll have a chance to adopt it officially. I hope I haven't forgotten anything. So if that's the case, then I wish you good work in the next few hours, where you will surely come to a conclusion on the GBFF. Thank you.